It was supposed to be a fun getaway with my girlfriend Jess. A weekend of camping and hiking in the mountains, just the two of us. We'd both been so busy with work lately, stressed out, and barely seeing each other. So this trip felt long overdue. A chance to reconnect. We arrived at the campground late Friday afternoon. It was pretty empty, being early in the season still. We found a nice spot nestled in the trees, not too far from the little creek that ran through the grounds. The air smelled like pine and earth. Jess was practically giddy as we set up the tent, chattering on about all the trails she wanted to explore. Her excitement was contagious. As evening set in, we built a fire and cooked dinner. Just some simple hot dogs and beans, but it tasted amazing out there in the fresh air. We made s'mores and snuggled up together, watching the flames dance and the stars slowly emerge overhead. It was perfect. We crawled into our sleeping bags around midnight, tired but happy. I remember lying there in the dark, listening to the soft sounds of Jess's breathing beside me, and the occasional pop from the embers of our dying fire outside. I felt so content, so peaceful. A few hours later, I woke up suddenly. At first, I wasn't sure why. I lay there blinking in the darkness, trying to get my bearings. Then I realized what was wrong. Jess wasn't in the tent. Her sleeping bag was empty. I sat up, fumbling for the flashlight. "Jess?" I called softly. No answer. I unzipped the tent and poked my head out. The campfire was cold, just ashes now. Everything outside was still and silent. Too silent, it seemed. I stepped out, shining the flashlight around. "Jess? Where are you?" My voice sounded small in the vastness of the night. I checked the car, thinking maybe she'd gone to grab something, but it was locked and she wasn't inside. A knot started to form in my stomach. I walked the perimeter of our campsite, checking the tree line. My heart starting to thud harder. I was about to really start panicking when I heard it. A muffled cry, coming from the direction of the creek. I took off at a run, stumbling over roots and rocks. "Jess! Jess! I'm coming!" I crashed through the underbrush and came out on the creek bank. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw her. She was halfway in the water, caught on something, thrashing and gasping. I splashed out to her, the icy water shocking my system. When I reached her, I saw what had happened. Her foot was tangled in some kind of fishing wire or something, tethering her to a tree root in the creek bed. She was panicking, choking on water every time she tried to free herself, and slipped under. I grabbed her, trying to hold her head above water while I worked at the wire around her ankle. It was tight and slick. I had to go under to see what I was doing. It took forever, but I finally got her free. I half carried, half dragged her back to the bank where we both collapsed, coughing and shuddering. I held her to me, trying to calm her down. She clung to me, sobbing, her whole body shaking violently. "What happened?" I asked, when she could speak. "Did you sleepwalk?" She shook her head, still gulping for air. "I heard something," she managed. I thought I heard a baby crying." I frowned. There were no other campers around us for at least a mile. "Out here? Are you sure?" She nodded. It sounded so real. I got up to look and then... I don't know. I was just in the water, stuck. She looked at me, her eyes wide and haunted. "Someone did this. Someone tied that wire there, across the creek. Why would someone do that?" I didn't have an answer. It made no sense. We were in the middle of nowhere. Who would booby trap a creek? And why? To catch animals? To hurt people? I looked downstream, at the dark woods the creek vanished into. I thought I saw something pale move between the trees. I blinked, and it was gone. A cold dread crept up my spine. I got Jess to her feet. "Let's get back to the tent," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Inside, I was shaking almost as much as she was. Something was very wrong here. I suddenly didn't want to wait until dawn to pack up and get the hell out of these woods. I pulled into the small dirt parking lot next to the trailhead, my car kicking up a cloud of dust behind me. It was early, maybe 6:30 a.m., and the sun was just starting to peek through the trees. I grabbed my backpack from the passenger seat and stepped out into the cool morning air, taking a deep breath. The scent of pine and earth filled my lungs. I had been planning this camping trip for weeks, a solo overnight hike to clear my head after a stressful few months at work. I needed to get away from the constant buzz of the city, the endless emails and meetings. Out here, it was just me and nature. The trail started off easy, winding through a dense forest of towering evergreens. The only sounds were my footsteps crunching on the dirt path and the occasional chirping of birds overhead. I felt myself starting to relax, the tension in my shoulders easing with each step. About an hour into the hike, I reached a small clearing. I paused to take a sip of water and check my map. That's when I noticed the silence. The birds had stopped singing. Even the breeze seemed to have stilled. An uneasy feeling crept over me, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I shook it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. I was alone out here after all. There was no one else around for miles. I shouldered my pack and continued on, the trail getting steeper as it climbed into the hills. Another hour passed, and the feeling of unease only grew. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched, though every time I glanced over my shoulder, there was nothing there. Just the trees and the trail behind me. I was just about to stop for lunch when I heard it, a twig snapping somewhere off to my left beyond the tree line. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. It was probably just an animal, I told myself. A deer or a squirrel. Nothing to be afraid of. But then I heard it again. Closer this time. And was that footsteps? The deliberate crunch of leaves underfoot, like someone trying to move quietly but not quite succeeding. "Hello!" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vastness of the forest. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then another snap, even closer than before. I spun around, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just the stillness of the woods, pressing in around me. I quickened my pace, no longer caring about enjoying the scenery. I just wanted to reach my campsite, set up my tent, and hunker down for the night. But the footsteps seemed to be keeping pace with me, always just out of sight behind the trees. By the time I reached the campsite, I was practically running. I threw down my pack and fumbled with the tent stakes, my hands shaking. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, or something, emerging from the woods. But there was never anything there. Just the lengthening shadows as the sun dipped below the tree line and the suffocating silence of the forest. I barely slept that night, jolting awake at every noise. The hoot of an owl, the skittering of small animals in the underbrush, and beneath it all, the constant feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. When dawn finally broke, pale and cold, I packed up my tent with shaking hands. I didn't bother with breakfast or coffee. I just wanted to get back to my car, back to civilization and the safety of other people. The hike back seemed to take forever, though I was moving as fast as I could. Every rustle in the bushes sent my heart racing. Every flicker of movement in my peripheral vision made me flinch. It wasn't until I burst out of the trees and into the parking lot, gasping for breath, that I finally allowed myself to relax. There were a few other cars there now, hikers and campers starting their day. The sight of them almost made me weep with relief. I threw my pack into the back seat and climbed behind the wheel, gripping it tightly as I pulled out onto the main road. In the rearview mirror, I caught a final glimpse of the trail disappearing into the trees. I still don't know what was out there, following me through the woods that day. Maybe it was all in my head, my imagination playing tricks on me. But I've never gone camping alone again, and I don't think I ever will. I pulled into the empty campground just before dusk. It was late October, and the nights were getting chilly, but I needed to get away. Things had been rough lately, work stress, a bad breakup, family drama. I just wanted some peace and quiet, a chance to breathe in the crisp autumn air and clear my head. I chose a spot near the edge of the grounds, close to the tree line but with a view of the small lake. As I set up my tent and organized my gear, I noticed how still everything was. No other campers, no distant car engines, not even a breeze rustling the leaves. Just an eerie, heavy silence that seemed to hang in the fading light. Once my small fire was crackling, I sat back in my chair and tried to relax. I breathed deeply, watching the first stars blink to life above the treetops. But something felt off. The silence was oppressive, like a physical weight on my chest. And the darkness beyond the circle of firelight seemed to pulse and swirl as if it were alive. I shook my head, laughing at myself. I was just tired, I thought, letting my imagination run wild. I pulled out the book I'd brought and tried to focus on the pages, but after a few minutes, I heard a sound that made my skin prickle. A long, low moan, coming from the woods behind me. At first, I dismissed it as the wind, but there was no wind. The night was completely still. I sat frozen, straining my ears. A minute passed, then two. I was about to chalk it up to exhaustion when I heard it again. That mournful, keening cry, rising in pitch, before fading into silence. My heart began to pound. It sounded almost human, but distorted somehow. Twisted. I told myself it must be an animal. But what kind of animal makes a sound like that? I thought of rabid foxes, diseased coyotes. I suddenly felt very alone, and very far from help. I doused my fire and scrambled into my tent, zipping it tight with shaking hands. I switched on my lantern and dug through my bag for the knife I'd packed. Just in case, I told myself. Gripping the handle, I huddled in my sleeping bag and tried to breathe evenly. Hours passed. The cry didn't come again. Eventually, my eyelids grew heavy. I was just drifting off when a sound jolted me awake. A rustling right outside my tent. Then, a shadow fell across the nylon wall, blotting out the moonlight. Something was out there. I heard a snuffling, a wet snorting, like an animal scenting prey. I clamped my hand over my mouth, trying not to make a sound. The thing outside paced back and forth, circling the tent. I could hear its heavy tread, the crackle of leaves and twigs under its feet. I clutched my knife to my chest, barely daring to breathe. Then the footsteps stopped, right beside me, inches from where I lay. I heard a low, guttural growl. Saw the fabric of the tent wall stretch inward as something pressed against it. I squeezed my eyes shut, hot tears leaking from the corners. This isn't happening, I thought. It's a nightmare. It has to be. A rank, fetid smell filled the tent, making me gag. The growl deepened, turning into a snarl, and then I felt a tug on the zipper. It was trying to get in. I don't know how long I lay there, rigid with terror, while the thing outside pawed and scratched at the tent. It felt like hours, an eternity. I prayed for dawn, for sunlight to drive the creature back into the woods. But the night seemed endless, and the assault on the nylon walls never ceased. Finally, as gray light began to seep through the fabric, the noises outside subsided. I heard the crunch of footsteps retreating, fading into the distance. Even then, I didn't move. I stayed curled in my sleeping bag, clutching my knife, until the sun was high in the sky. When I finally crawled out of the tent, I expected to see the campsite destroyed. Claw marks, trampled grass, broken branches. But everything looked untouched, pristine, as if nothing had ever been there at all. I packed up as fast as I could, not bothering to change out of my sweat-soaked clothes. I threw my gear in the car and sped out of the campground, tires spraying gravel. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway, putting mile after mile between myself and those whispering woods. I never went back to that place. I never even went camping again, because I know what I heard that night. I know what I felt. And I know, deep in my bones, that it's still out there, waiting, hungry. I'd been looking forward to this camping trip for weeks. Just me, my dog Scout, and the peace and quiet of the woods. I found a remote campsite online that looked perfect. Secluded, scenic, and far from the crowds. The photos showed a cozy clearing surrounded by tall pines and promised pristine hiking trails nearby. I couldn't wait to pitch my tent and explore. The drive up was long, but beautiful. Winding roads, cutting through the dense forest. Scout dozed in the passenger seat while I followed the GPS, watching as the little arrow on the screen veered further and further from civilization. By the time I reached the dirt access road to the campground, I hadn't seen another car for miles. I pulled into the deserted parking lot, a bit surprised to find it completely empty on such a nice summer weekend. I figured we must have just beat the rush. Scout leaped out as soon as I opened the door, eager to stretch his legs. The air smelled like pine needles and wildflowers. I took a deep breath, feeling the stress of the work week melt away. The trail to the campsite was short, but overgrown, obviously not well traveled. Branches scratched at my arms as I pushed through the brush, dragging my heavy pack behind me. Scout bounded ahead, his tail wagging excitedly. After about 10 minutes of hiking, we emerged into the clearing. It was just as beautiful as the pictures had shown. A small, grassy area ringed by towering evergreens, with a stone-lined fire pit in the center. But something felt off. As I walked closer, I noticed the ashes in the fire pit were fresh, still warm to the touch. And there was a tent, already set up on the far side of the clearing. "Hello?" I called out, assuming it was another camper. "Is anyone here?" No response. Scout sniffed around the tent, whining softly. The flap was unzipped, fluttering slightly in the breeze. I peered inside, but it was empty, just a sleeping bag and a backpack tossed haphazardly on the ground. It looked like whoever had been here left in a hurry. A twig snapped in the woods behind me, and I spun around, my heart racing. But there was nothing there. Just the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird. I took a shaky breath, telling myself I was just paranoid from being alone in the woods. I busied myself setting up my own tent, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling in my gut. Scout stayed close by my side, on alert. As I hammered in the last stake, I heard it. A long, low whistle echoing through the trees. Scout's ears perked up, and a growl rumbled in his throat. The whistle came again, closer this time. And then I heard the footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching over the dead leaves. I reached for the knife in my belt, my hands trembling. Scout moved in front of me, his hackles raised. A figure emerged from the shadows of the forest, a man in a faded green jacket, with a hood pulled low over his face. He stopped at the edge of the clearing and tilted his head, watching us. "Can I help you?" My voice sounded thin and reedy, fear clawing at my throat. The man said nothing. He took a step forward, and that's when I saw the axe in his hand, the blade glinting in the fading daylight. Scout lunged, barking furiously, and the man raised the axe, his lips curling into a terrible smile. I grabbed Scout's collar and ran, adrenaline coursing through my veins. We tore blindly through the woods, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning. Behind us, the steady thud of footsteps grew louder, the whistle piercing the air again and again. I didn't stop running until I reached the car, frantically fumbling with the keys as I unlocked the doors. I shoved Scout inside and peeled out of the parking lot, gravel spraying behind us. In the rearview mirror, I glimpsed the man standing at the trailhead, the axe still in his hand, watching us flee. I drove until the woods were far behind us, until my heart stopped pounding in my ears. And I promised myself that next time I'd stick to camping in my own backyard, where the only thing lurking in the shadows was the neighbor's cat.